Sustainability at Hobsons Bay Libraries, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's EnviroCentre event. I would like to begin by acknowledging that depending on where you join me from tonight, we are potentially gathered on the traditional lands of many peoples. From my home, I host you from the lands of the Murrin-Bullock clan of the Wurundjeri people, and I would like to pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as those of the wider Kulin Nation, whose boundaries cover the Hobsons Bay City Council area, where many of you are likely joining us from tonight, but not excluding all traditional owners whose lands we may be communally standing on this evening. Council acknowledges that long before this area was known as Hobsons Bay, our First Nations people had named its places, hosted ancient ceremonies where learning flourished, where knowledge and resources were exchanged, and where healthy communities and relationships were sustained and adapted to the changing environments. We recognise the unique role that diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from many lands continue to play in the life of our city. We pay homage to that this evening, coming together to learn and to share, to sustain and to adapt. So just a little bit of housekeeping for tonight. As I've already said, it is going to be recorded and we might be taking some snapshots during this session. So if you don't want to be on those recordings, please make sure your video is turned off. I'm just going to jump in here to just mute some of that background sound as well. So as I've just done, we're just going to mute people's microphones during the presentation, just so there's not that background sound, but we will have time for Q&A. We're going to have a few breaks during this session and then also at the end. So we've got a couple of options there. If you've got a question in the middle and you want to make sure you don't forget it, you're welcome to pop it in the chat, and then I'll keep track of those questions. When it comes time, I'll either say, would you like to unmute yourself and come on and ask your question, or if you'd prefer not to come on, just pop that in the chat as well, and I'm more than happy to ask your question to Rachel for you. So we'll have a few breaks for questions and then questions at the end as well. So tonight's event is being brought to you by Hobsons Bay Libraries and the EnviroCentre. Just a quick update on what's happening with the libraries at the moment. Not much has changed since last week if you joined in on last week's event. All of our return shoots have now reopened, and all loans that are currently out have all been extended until the 26th of October. So that includes DVDs and magazines that are normally only a 1 week loan. So don't feel like you have to rush out and bring your items back just because those shoots are open. Please wait until you're coming out for one of those 4 reasons to leave your home, and then you can drop them off while you're there. Otherwise, our Book a Book home delivery has also restarted. So if you've got books from last time and you're getting another delivery, you can leave those books out on the same day that we're delivering you new ones, and we'll pick those ones up for you as well. And our home delivery service for customers has restarted as well. But tonight is what we're all here for. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on the year that has been 2020. No one needs an explanation. But I do just want to quickly mention that there's so many things that have been out of our control over the last 6 months. And my aim in bringing you this event tonight was the hope that we can all learn some ways to respond to what's going on around us. So tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Rachael Kable. Rachael is a mindfulness coach, an award-winning blogger, host of the Mindful Kind podcast, and author of the Mindful Kind book. She has a big dream to empower people around the world to live more mindfully in fun, simple and meaningful ways. So please join me in welcoming Rachael.
Hello, thanks for having me. All right, I think I've just unmuted myself successfully.
You are unmuted. You are good to go, Rachael.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Hello, everybody. This is so exciting. Thank you for coming and sharing this night with me. I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to share lots of mindfulness tips with you. So just in a little nutshell, I'm Rachael, and I love teaching mindfulness and sharing lots of stress management strategies. So I grew up experiencing quite a bit of stress and anxiety myself, and became very interested in understanding more about my own mind. So I went to university to study psychology. I really enjoyed it. I ended up volunteering on a helpline at the Anxiety Recovery Centre for Victoria, which is where I first learned about mindfulness and started trying out different techniques. I noticed some real benefits quite quickly and decided that it was something that I really wanted to share with other people. So a couple of years later, I started my podcast, The Mindful Kind. That was back in 2015, and I'm still doing it today. So it's been a really wonderful journey from learning about mindfulness, starting to share it, and now I have a wonderful community of people who inspire me to keep going and to keep sharing new things. So that's just a little bit about me, but you can definitely find out more of my resources at rachaelkable.com. You'll find my podcast there, my blogs, free resources, lots of different things. So tonight is all about mindfulness during trying times, and just a little bit about how this session is going to work. I'll spend about 20 minutes talking about what mindfulness is and some simple tips to help you get started with your own mindfulness practice. If you do have any questions about it, I will answer a couple of questions at the end of those 20 minutes. And then the next part of the session, I'm going to focus a little bit on mindful walking, just because it's such a wonderful technique to have in your repertoire. And then I'll take some more questions. And then for the last 20 minutes of the session, I'm going to talk about mindfulness specifically for challenging times. And again, we'll do some questions at the end of that. So in terms of what mindfulness actually is, mindfulness is all about being present in the moment with an open-minded and perhaps curious and non-judgmental attitude. And it's kind of hard to explain what mindfulness actually is. So sometimes I like to share just an example to make it a little bit clearer. So for example, imagine you're sitting down in the morning to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and you're sitting there and thinking about your day. You're planning out your to-do list. You're ruminating over things that have happened the day before or the week before. Basically, your mind is not in the present moment. You're distracted by thoughts about the past or the future. Now, to do this activity more mindfully, you might focus your attention on the present moment by noticing the flavor of your drink, perhaps feeling the weight of the cup in your hands, noticing so the aroma, the flavor, the texture, all those different little sensations about your drink. Perhaps even tuning into your own body and what you can feel. So the temperature of your body, perhaps noticing the movement of your breath. So any of those little sensations that help you focus your attention on the present moment in a non-judgmental way. So trying not to label anything as good or bad, or I hate this, I like this. It's trying more to just observe what the present moment is actually like. So, oh, the flavor is this, the aroma is this, and really immersing yourself in that experience. So that's a little bit about what mindfulness actually is, and I will actually share a couple of different mindfulness exercises in a little bit as well. Actually, maybe we'll just do an exercise now so you can have a little practice. So first of all, you might like to make yourself nice and comfortable in your seat, and starting off by placing one hand over the center of your chest. Now you're welcome to close your eyes down if you'd like to, or just keep a soft gaze in front of you. Now, as you breathe, feel your chest rising and falling. So as you breathe in, your chest is rising, and as you breathe out, your chest is falling. And just paying attention to that movement. If your mind starts to wander, that's perfectly normal. Just refocusing on that sensation of your chest rising and falling as you breathe. Beautiful. Now you can move your hand away. If your eyes are closed, you're welcome to open them up and just take some time adjusting back into the room around you. So I hope you enjoyed that very simple mindful breathing technique. I just call it hand on heart breathing. There's lots of different mindful breathing techniques that you can try, but I really like that one. I think that the physical sensations of each breath moving in and out of my body is a really grounding practice. It's a very simple practice and it's accessible as well. So if you're out and about and starting to feel overwhelmed or stressed, or you just want to take 5 or 10 breaths to focus your attention on the present moment, that's a really easy one that you can practice. Okay, now I thought I might talk about some sort of simple strategies to help you get started with your mindfulness practice. So, one of the ways that you can implement mindfulness into your day is to just start when you wake up in the morning. So, first thing in the morning, your alarm goes off. Hopefully, you've got maybe 30 seconds or a minute or even 5 minutes to stay in bed and try a mindfulness technique. So, you can use that mindful breathing technique that I just shared with you. There's lots of other mindfulness techniques that you can find, many of which I've described on my website, in my blogs, and on my podcast, such as the body scan, where you scan your attention through your whole body. So starting from the tips of your toes, noticing your toes, your feet, your ankles, your legs, and working all the way up through your body. Another really fun way to practice mindfulness, it's called a mindfulness senses game. And this was the first mindfulness practice that I actually ever learned when I was at the Anxiety Recovery Centre. So you notice 5 things that you can see. So for example, I can look around, I can see a light, a plant, a glass of water, a stool, and my hands. So there's 5 things I can see. Then noticing 4 things that you can hear, 3 things you can feel in your body. So for example, I can feel the ground underneath my feet, my back against the chair, and my jumper against my neck. Noticing 2 things that you can smell. So maybe just noticing if there is an aroma that you can smell, and if not, you can always like grab your doona and smell. Hopefully it smells all nice and fresh and lovely, or even, smell like, what does my hand smell like? I know that sounds a bit weird, but these smells are very subtle, and it's a great way to explore your mindfulness practice. And then finally finishing off with 1 thing that you can taste. So that's a very simple, fun mindfulness game that you can play if you've got 30 seconds or a minute in the morning. So that's the first way that you can start to implement some mindfulness into your day. Another way that you can go about this is to actually choose an activity that you do already each day and kind of designate that as your mindfulness activity. So for example, my favorite mindfulness activity is a mindful cup of coffee in the morning. That's kind of my go-to. But there's probably many different daily activities that you're doing that you could intentionally pay attention to, whether that's taking a shower or washing your dishes, making your bed, having a conversation with a loved one, getting dressed. There's so many different daily things that we're doing where our minds might be focused on the past or the future or just not in the present moment. But you can choose one of those activities to be your kind of like mindfulness activity for the day. So you're getting your mindfulness in that way. Another way that you can practice mindfulness each day is to tune into your body and notice when you're starting to feel stressed. And this is something that I do myself quite a lot. When you notice yourself feeling stressed, that can be a wonderful signal that it's a good time to implement a mindfulness practice. So for example, sometimes I'll be going through my emails and I'm starting to get a bit overwhelmed, like, oh, there's so much to do. I'm feeling like I don't have enough time, or maybe I've received a stressful email that I don't really know how to take action on. And you can feel when stress is starting to build in the body. Like I notice that first of all, my heart starts racing, or maybe I start sweating. So picking up on those little stress cues and deciding, okay, this is a good time for a mindfulness technique. So again, playing that mindfulness senses game, using a mindful breathing technique or a body scan, or even just tuning into your senses in any way that feels good for you. So for example, I love tuning into my sense of smell, and I've got lots of little mindfulness tools all around my desk. Like my little spray bottles up there. I just kind of spray them above me and just take a moment to sit there and smell that nice aroma. So yeah, it's nice to collect little mindfulness tools that help you tune into the present moment at times when you might be more likely to need them. So for example, I know that sometimes I get a bit more stressed when I'm at work or doing work at home. And so having little mindfulness tools around me that I can just grab and use for 10 or 20 or 30 seconds when I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed and I just want that little mental break to get grounded and to calm down, that can be a wonderful strategy to use. So those are my 3 little tips to help you get started with your mindfulness practice. Start first thing in the morning if you can. Try to choose a mindful activity that you can do each day. Actually, another really wonderful way to go about that is to have some kind of creative activity, because often we get very immersed in the present moment when we're being creative. So you might not need to try that hard to practice mindfulness. A creative activity can kind of bring that out. So whether that's gardening or mindful coloring or writing or playing music, that can be a really wonderful little mindfulness daily activity. And then the third tip was to use stress as a bit of a signal for when might be a good time to implement a mindfulness technique. So that's kind of the first little session that I wanted to share with you about mindfulness and what it is, and some little strategies and some tips to help you get started. So I just wanted to check in and see, are there any questions so far? Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask specifically about mindfulness? And yeah, just I think pop it in the chat there and Mel will be having a look. And if there's not any, then I'll move on to the next session.
There's no questions in the chat yet, Rachel. If anybody does, oh no, here we've got Miana, did you want to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Oh, yes. Hi, Rachel. I just wanted to quickly ask, you mentioned the mindfulness tools and you mentioned the spray that you had in your room. Are there any other tools that you'd recommend just to have on hand?
Yeah, definitely. So there are lots of different tools that you can use. Another really simple one is jewelry. Like I have my ring, and sometimes if I'm, out and about and I don't have any specific tools around me, I just kind of take a moment to look at my ring, notice like what it feels underneath my fingers. Just taking that little moment can be really nice. Another helpful mindfulness tool that I really enjoy is music, especially some lovely meditation music. Tuning into that sense of sound can be a wonderful way to unwind, especially with meditation music, because it's already quite relaxing. So then if you're tuning into it in a mindful way as well, that can be fantastic. Also, you probably have noticed, I've got quite a few plants behind me. They are kind of my other little mindfulness tool that I love to have, just because if I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, I'll pick up a plant and notice all the different textures of the leaves and just see if there's any new shoots coming through. And that's kind of a nice little way that I can implement mindfulness into my day using one of those little mindfulness tools. So those are just a couple, but you can find plenty, anything that resonates with you. So aromatic candles can be another really lovely one. Even a journal, if you just want to pick it up and kind of flick through the pages and feel what it feels like, or even jot down a couple of thoughts if you've got time. I always have my journal next to my desk, so each day I actually pick it up and write down a memory. So you probably can't really see that too well, but each night I just like to remember 1 or 2 nice things that happened during the day, and I've been doing that for almost 3 years now, so it's a lovely kind of keepsake. I can look back at my journals and see on the 21st of April in 2019 these 2 lovely things happened during my day, and that's just a really simple little mindfulness tool that can be helpful. Thank you, that was a great question.
Thank you.
We've got a few more, if it's okay to do a few more, Rachel.
Yeah, no problems.
Leanne, would you like to unmute yourself? And I like this question because this is one I struggle with as well.
Sorry, just learning how to use the technology.
Hi, Leanne.
I often struggle. I've tried to do mindfulness a few times, and my mind, despite trying my hardest to bring it back to trying to relax and focus on my body or something else, it can't help but wander and thoughts come in and out, and I think it's because we lead rather active lives. Like we're not used to just being still, and our minds go kind of crazy at that same pace. Do you have any tips or techniques on how to, I guess, calm your mind down? Because what happens to me, and I'm not sure if it happens to everybody else, is your mind wanders, you try to bring yourself back, and when it happens 2 or 3 times, you're calm. But when it happens constantly, then the benefits of mindfulness kind of disappear, and I find myself getting more anxious at the fact that I can't focus.
Yes, definitely. I have heard that from so many people, but also I had the exact same experience, and I still have the same experience to this day. I've found one sort of counterintuitive way to go about this is to go into a mindfulness practice knowing that your mind will wander and being accepting that your mind will wander. So even before I start a mindfulness practice, especially if I'm trying to aim for a 10 or 20-minute practice, I'll go into it saying to myself, my mind is going to wander. It might wander 100 times, and if it does, that's okay. If I get completely distracted for a little while, that's okay too. You know, as soon as I do notice that my mind has wandered, I just gently try to refocus it back on the practice. But I've found that in this weird way, setting the intention of knowing that my mind will wander and just being okay with that has really taken the pressure off and made mindfulness practices so much more enjoyable. But I've also found that sometimes when I give myself permission to let my mind wander, it actually just focuses on the present moment a lot easier. And it's really strange because I studied a meditation certificate as well. And at the end of those meditations, we were taught to say, okay, now for the next couple of minutes, you can just let your mind do whatever you like. So we've just finished a 15-minute meditation. Now you can just let your mind do whatever, anything that feels good. And most of the time I've found personally, and other people have said this too, that as soon as we say, okay, your mind can wander as much as it wants to, it doesn't. And it stays a bit more focused on the moment and feels still. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. It is definitely frustrating at the start, especially, but I think the more that we can accept that our minds will wander, it's very natural for our minds to wander as well. That can make it a little bit easier. And you do get better with practice as well. So I used to struggle even just with a minute, and then I built up to 5 and then 10 and then 20. And I can do a 30-minute practice now, and it's not always easy, but you know, it just gets easier with time the more you practice. Thank you for that question.
So just looking through the chat, there's a few comments in there of things that have helped for other people. So feel free to have a look through that chat. But there was another question in here. Wendy, I think your question about how do you shut out the distractions has kind of been the same thing that Rachel was just speaking about. And Wendy, you had another question about your essential task. Did you want to ask that one?
Sure. It's really about I'm trying to help somebody declutter their house at the moment, and one of the things that came to me early on was to try and apply mindfulness to that task, partially to prevent more clutter from just changing the whole behavior from the start to not bringing things into the house that are not going to be used or needed. And then the other thing is this person also has an anxiety disorder, and how you use mindfulness with what is essentially the clutter represents a whole lot of trauma in that person's life. And so how you go about that in a sort of maybe a structured way, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Wendy. That's a very good question. It's quite a complex question as well. I think it sounds like there's a lot of different things going on there for this person, and I can imagine it's very difficult to be trying to let go of clutter, especially if it's related to trauma, because there's quite a lot of attachment there. and so that anxiety can really be triggered when they're trying to get rid of the clutter. Perhaps one simple technique that might be helpful is a grounding technique. So, for example, if they can feel that their anxiety is starting to become overwhelming, taking a moment to even sit or lie down on the floor and feeling I'm on the floor, I'm in my room, you know, I'm lying down or I'm sitting down. The floor feels rough underneath me or soft underneath me, like actually just tuning into all those physical sensations and really taking the time to feel grounded can be quite a supportive practice, just because anxiety is such a flighty feeling. I mean, it's part of the fight or flight response, so it is that, you know, that panicky kind of feeling, and so becoming grounded actually on the floor can be quite supportive and calming. Another little practice that might actually be helpful is some kind of self-compassionate soothing touch. So again, placing the hand over the chest, or some people like to place a hand against their cheek, or to even wrap their arms around them like they're giving themselves a hug, to take a moment to say, I'm okay, this is a very difficult situation. I understand why I'm feeling anxious, but in this moment I am safe and I'm okay. Paired with that soothing touch can be quite a wonderful way to help soothe anxiety. So hopefully those two little techniques might be helpful, but as well as any other support that might be necessary, because it sounds like there's a lot of big challenges going on there.
Thank you, Rachel. Do we have time for one more before we move on?
Yeah, sure.
Regina, would you like to unmute yourself to ask your question? And everyone else, please feel free to have a look in the chat. People are popping all their different techniques that they use in there, so there's some great stuff in there.
So exciting.
Thanks for that. I was just wondering, you know, how long should we, you know, spend on an exercise? But I think you explained it by saying when you start off, it can be shorter and then you build it up over time. And some of your exercises are up to half an hour, which sounds a lot. But I take your point that you start off with, you know, just slowly and you can build it up, obviously at your own speed and so forth. Should you aim, actually, while I've got you, should you aim, like is half an hour the optimum? Is that what we should be aiming for, or is it very much a personal thing?
Yeah, thanks, Regina. That's a great question. In terms of how long to aim for, a lot of studies have found that 20 minutes of mindfulness per day is kind of their suggestion to get the benefits that mindfulness has to offer, so the actual physical changes in the brain and things like that. 20 minutes is kind of the suggested time frame. But in saying that, you know, I definitely started to notice differences without doing 20 minutes every day. At the start, I was just doing 1 minute or 5 minutes, or doing activities in a more mindful way, like having those mindful conversations with people was a really nice one that helped strengthen my relationships quite quickly. And in terms of having those mindful conversations, it's setting the intention to give the other person the opportunity to talk and really listening and paying attention to what they have to say without thinking, you know, what am I going to say next, or being distracted by a phone or technology or anything like that. It's really creating that very intentional space to have a conversation free of distraction. So I hope that answers the question. I think it's very individual, so everyone has a preferred amount of time. And, you know, for me, I like to actually break mine up quite often. So I do a 30-minute practice every now and again, but in my daily life, I often like to work for 25 minutes. I have a little timer that I set. I work for 25 minutes and I take a 5-minute mindful breathing break. I work for another 25 minutes and then I take another 5-minute break. So it kind of adds up during the day. So that's another way you can go about it.
Great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thanks, Regina.
We might continue on. There's no questions there, but feel free to keep them coming in the chat and I'll keep an eye out for them.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, everyone, for the questions. That was wonderful. Okay, so I thought that I might dive into some mindful walking, just because it is a really great mindfulness technique to know about, and especially at times like this where we're just starting to be able to get out and about a little bit more. So what is mindful walking? Mindful walking is really just regular walking, but paying attention to it in a mindful way. So perhaps trying to leave your phone on silent or at home, paying attention to the world around you, noticing the ground underneath your feet, noticing your breath. I will dive into these little strategies a bit more in a little bit, but I wanted to first touch on some of the benefits that mindful walking has to offer. First of all, obviously exercise is wonderful for the body and the mind. There's been so much different research about the great things that exercise does have to offer. So better cognitive function, which means basically better learning, better memory, better attention span, things like that. Getting that endorphin hit, so perhaps feeling a little bit more positive and optimistic, protection from all types of different diseases like obesity and heart disease. Exercise is fantastic. And walking is such an undervalued exercise, I feel like. It's a great way to have the time to practice mindfulness, because I think when we're doing a bit more vigorous exercise, it can be quite overwhelming, and it's hard to have that time to slow down and really tune in and pay attention to what's happening. So the other thing about mindful walking that I wanted to mention is often if we can get out in nature and go for a walk, that can be kind of a double benefit, because spending time in nature can have a very calming effect on the nervous system. And actually a study in 2019 had found that just 20 minutes of spending time in nature, even if it was just sitting on a park bench or sitting next to a lake, you didn't even have to really be walking around, but that 20 minutes was enough to find in participants that their stress hormones had reduced, and between 20 and 30 minutes was the optimal amount of time to have quite a large reduction in stress hormones in the body. So there's a couple of different benefits of mindful walking that, I've just explained, but if you do have any more questions about that, I'd love to hear them. Obviously there are other benefits too, but those are two of my favorites. So in terms of mindful walking strategies, the first one that I wanted to talk about was just tuning into the senses. And this is a great way to pay attention to the world around you. So again, tuning into your sense of sight, tuning into your sense of sound, smell, sensations. Sight and sound can be really nice ones to play around with. So maybe you can spend a couple of minutes focusing on your sense of sight, noticing flowers and colors and shapes or textures or light or shadows, all different things like that. You can even try labeling objects as you walk. So, walking down the street and saying there's a blue fence, there's a green leaf, there's a black cat, labeling objects and their colors can be quite a fun little mindfulness sort of trick, I guess. And tuning into that sense of sound as well, because obviously when we're out and about, there's lots of different things going on around us, and sound can be a really fun one to experiment with, because the sounds that are close to us, which might be quite obvious, but if you take the time to tune in, you might hear sounds quite a bit further in the distance that would be very easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. So that's one very simple little way to practice mindful walking, is simply tuning into your senses. Another one that I like to talk about is paying attention to the feeling of the ground underneath your feet and the sensations in your body as you walk. So for example, you'll be swinging your arms, you might feel the coolness of the air, you might feel that solid ground underneath your feet, or even the sensation of your foot peeling away from the ground can be quite a, it's almost weird because our bodies are so naturally going about these activities that we don't have to pay attention. But it's quite remarkable, that we can do these things without even thinking about them. And when we pay attention to them, it can be just a different way to experience the present moment. The other little mindful walking technique that I wanted to share was, once again, about mindful breathing. I talk about mindful breathing a lot because it's probably my favorite mindfulness practice. But as you walk, this is something that I like to do. As I'm walking, I might take like 4 steps as I breathe in and then 4 steps as I breathe out. And it's nice to get into that bit of a pattern, perhaps taking those deeper breaths as well, just because you're getting more oxygen, and perhaps even slowing down any stress response that might be there. So just paying attention to your breath, if you want to as well, can be a really great thing to do. You don't have to match your breathing up to your footsteps as you walk either. You can just pay attention to your breath in any way that feels good for you. A simple way is to observe the breath as it moves in and out of the body. So before, we placed our hand on the chest and felt the breath actually physically moving in and out, but you can observe the journey. So just noticing the breath moving in through the nose, down the throat, into the chest and into the diaphragm, and then all the way back out again, not having to actually feel it, but just observing that little journey. So those are some mindful walking strategies that I personally really like to use, but I think especially at this point in time when we can be starting to get out and about quite a bit more, it's a great opportunity to start practicing mindfulness and maybe to change the way that we interact with the world as we slowly become, get back out there a little bit more. So I think that was everything I wanted to say about mindful walking, but does anyone have any questions about anything that I've shared in terms of mindful walking, or anything that I can clarify a little bit more before I move on to the next little part of the session?
I'm running through all the chat. I think there's lots of conversation going on, but I don't think there's any questions in there. But if anybody has one, feel free to raise your hand and I can pass over to you.
Cool.
But I think nope, I think we're right to continue on, Rachel.
Oh, good, perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, so the last little part of this session, I wanted to focus a little bit more on the uncertain times that we've been going through, and perhaps some of the reasons why it's been quite difficult. I think that there's been so much pressure that people have been putting on themselves to be productive and be as happy as they were this time last year, and to be achieving new things and to be adapting to working from home with a click of a finger. There's so many different things that are going on. So it's nice to understand a little bit more why it's been difficult, so we can give ourselves that self-compassion and say, you know what, maybe I haven't achieved my goals that I set this year, but I am looking after myself as best as I can and trying to prioritize my well-being, and maybe that's enough. So in terms of uncertainty, it is very strange sometimes that uncertainty can be very difficult for us to accept as human beings. We like to know the answers. Our minds especially like to feel like they have the answers. And there was actually a study done a little while ago where the participants were playing this computer game, and every time that there was a snake under a rock, they had to kind of click all the different rocks, and then they clicked a rock. If there was a snake under the rock, they got a mild electric shock. And if there wasn't a snake under the rock, then they didn't get that electric shock. And what the researchers actually found as they were observing the participants, they were watching their stress levels. What they found was that when people knew there was a snake under the rock, they actually didn't have stress levels as high as when they didn't know for sure if there was going to be a snake under the rock. So I know that probably sounds a little bit confusing, but basically the gist of it is people were more stressed when they didn't know the answer than when they knew for sure that they were going to get an electric shock. So people were more stressed about the uncertainty, which to me seemed very strange. Like, why would anybody be more stressed about not knowing than about getting an electric shock for sure? And then I thought back to this time not too long ago when I was catching a flight home, and then there was a connecting flight straight afterwards. And the first flight kept getting delayed, and I was sitting at the airport and I was watching the times coming up and thinking, am I going to make my flight? You know, what's happening? Just, you know, all this uncertainty. And that was the worst part. I actually learned that the flight was so delayed that I wasn't going to make my connecting flight. It was going to be much harder to get home. It was going to take a long time. But I felt better knowing that than I had felt when I didn't know if I could make the flight or not. And I think part of that is because when we know for sure that there's an outcome, even if it's a good or a bad outcome, we can plan and we can start to figure things out. Whereas when things are up in the air, it's very difficult to know what the right thing is to do or how to prepare. So I think that's kind of a little part of the reason why this year has been particularly challenging, because there's so much more uncertainty than what we might be used to. And that's been very difficult for a lot of people. The other thing I think that has been really challenging is the separation of people. So not having as close social connections has been particularly difficult, and there's lots of reasons biologically for that. You know, we're very social creatures, and our biology actually wants us to be around others. So loneliness has come about because so back in cave days, sort of, I'm going to explain a little bit of evolution for you, but back in the cave days, if you got separated from your main tribe, you were vulnerable. It was a problem because you might not survive. You were encouraged by your body to connect back with your social group so that you would be safer. We still have that biological need today. We want to be around other people, and there's studies that have shown, you know, we tend to sleep better when there's someone next to us and different things like that, which is quite interesting to think that something from so long ago still has such an influence on us today. So I think being disconnected from people has been very difficult, maybe more so than we might know. And the other sort of thing I think that has been difficult this year is the changing in the routines and just the general changes. There's been a lot to adapt to. I think we underestimate how much of a toll it can take on us to have those routines kind of stripped away and have to recreate them and reestablish new foundations. We often find a lot of comfort in our everyday routines, going to work the same way at the same time, getting the same coffee from the same cafe, seeing the same people. These routines feel very safe and very comfortable. And so not having those same routines for many of us has been a bit of a challenge, and it's been something new to adapt to. Anyway, the reason why I kind of wanted to touch on all of these things is it's understandable if you've been having a rough time, if you've been finding it difficult to adjust, if you've been feeling more lonely or a bit more down or a bit more stressed and anxious. I think that collectively, working with a lot of clients and even just talking with people in my community, I feel like stress levels have been about here, you know, for the last however long. And just this last year, everyone collectively has been on this higher level of feeling a bit stressed and a bit rushed and overwhelmed and trying to adjust. So it's been definitely tough. And if you've been feeling that, you're absolutely not alone. And I wanted to talk a little bit too about mindfulness and mindful self-care, because for me, this year has been about upping my self-care activities because of that higher level of stress. Like the baseline is different. My self-care has kind of risen to match that, in the same way that, you know, when it's summer and it's a hot day and I'm sweating a lot, I need to drink more water to stay hydrated. I feel like at the moment I need more self-care to maintain normal levels of well-being and normal levels of mental health for me. So when I talk about mindful self-care, there's lots of different self-care activities that you can incorporate into your days. You might already be doing quite a lot of them, whether that's taking a bath, reading a book, having a cup of tea, something simple like sitting outside in the sunshine for 5 minutes in the middle of the day during your lunch break can be a really wonderful way to get some vitamin D, but also to practice mindfulness, to feel the warmth of the sun, maybe to put your phone down and just feel the grass underneath your toes, or look at the different shapes of the clouds in the sky. So yeah, I think there's quite a big difference between doing self-care and being distracted, and then doing self-care in a mindful way. So paying attention to the different sensations, paying attention even to your emotions, giving yourself space to feel whatever might be underneath the surface. So I know for me, sometimes when I'm working and I'm busy and life is kind of, steamrolling ahead, emotions can get kind of squashed down and they become less of a priority to feel them and find healthy ways to express them. But I think that's almost one of the other things that has been challenging about this whole experience this year, is that people have had more time, and these emotions that might have been getting suppressed for maybe a very long time have been kind of coming up to the surface, and people aren't necessarily equipped to deal with those emotions, or maybe they feel judgmental of those emotions. I know I used to categorize happiness, excitement, motivation, they're good emotions, and sadness and anger and frustration and jealousy, they're bad emotions. And so whenever I felt those bad emotions, I felt guilty and I felt ashamed of those emotions. Whereas practicing mindfulness and trying to be open-minded to whatever might be there emotionally has been quite a transformative practice for me. And I've really learned that emotions, we experience a full range of emotions as human beings. That's normal to feel all different kinds of feelings. So there's one particular mindfulness practice that can give you some space to do that. And I will share it with you in a moment. But first, I kind of wanted to explain a little bit why it can be a really good one to incorporate into your day, even if it's just 1 or 2 minutes at the end of the day. I think we can, as our experiences unfold during the day, we have emotions and maybe we kind of tuck them away and then they don't actually get expressed or felt. So this little mindfulness practice can be a great opportunity to just check in and say, like, how am I actually feeling? And then once you've done that and you've acknowledged the emotions and taken some time to feel those emotions, you can decide, what do I want to do to look after myself, or what do I need? I think that's kind of everything I wanted to say about the technique. So if you'd like to practice along with me, you're welcome to once again make yourself nice and comfortable where you're sitting. Again, you can close down your eyes or just keep a soft gaze in front of you. So this is called the one seat meditation. And it's really just about being open to any thoughts, any feelings that are there for you in this moment. You don't need to focus on any particular thing. Just trying to be present with whatever internal experiences might be there for you today. If you are feeling like you need to settle in a little bit more, maybe taking 1 or 2 deep breaths, releasing any tension from your body as you exhale. And perhaps just gently asking yourself, how am I feeling emotionally right now? And where can you feel those emotions in your body physically? So for example, if I'm stressed, I can often feel that in my chest and stomach. Anger, I often feel in my chest. Perhaps just tuning into any emotions and where they are in your body. You might even see your emotion as a particular color or having a particular shape. Trying as well to be curious about your emotions. Instead of labeling anything as good or bad or right or wrong, instead being curious. And if any thoughts pop up, that's perfectly okay. Maybe you can notice them too. Is it a persistent thought? Is it a very random thought? Really just taking this time to observe what's going on. in your mind and in your body. And to finish up this little meditation, just taking 1 or 2 more deep breaths. And as you exhale, releasing any tension that you might be holding. You might feel your shoulders drop, your stomach unclench, your jaw unclench. Beautiful. So that was the 1 seat meditation. If your eyes are closed, you're welcome to open them up and just take some time to adjust back into the light. And one thing that can be really helpful at the end of that kind of mindfulness exercise is to ask, is there something I can do now to look after myself? Is there something that I need? So if there was one particular emotion that was coming up and maybe it was confronting or vulnerable or challenging, is there something nice that I can do for myself? Is there some kind of self-care that would be helpful in this moment or for the rest of the night? If you're feeling exhausted, maybe going to bed a little bit earlier. If you're feeling lonely, maybe calling a friend. You know, there's emotions there for a reason, and sometimes they are signals to us, and we spend a lot of time tuning out from the emotions and we miss the signals. So this can be an opportunity to start listening to what the emotions are trying to say. Anger can be a signal that a boundary has been crossed or that a need hasn't been met. There's a lot more to emotions than just the sensations. So I hope you enjoyed that little mindfulness exercise. Again, that's called the 1 seat meditation. I have talked about that on my website before. I can't remember specifically where, but if you want to find out more, you're welcome to email me or send me a message on social media and I can find that for you. Cool. So I think that was pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in this session. So if there's any more questions, we have some time to get to those. It's been great to hear the questions that have come up so far. So I'm excited to hear anything else that anyone might want to know. And thank you to everyone who's still here. It was amazing.
I just want to say how lovely that analogy was used about if it's a hot day and we're sweating, we drink more water. If our anxieties are rising, we need to be aware of that and give ourselves self-care. It's such a beautiful way to, you know, often people feel guilty about giving the self-care that, you know, there's other things, whether it's children or partners, and it's just a really, I felt that really resonated with me. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Mel.
Do you have anything to say about the guilt that people feel about taking this self-care?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, what I think about, and because I used to feel quite guilty about self-care as well. For me, the way that I tend to think about self-care is it's a gift for not just me, but for the people around me. Because when I'm looking after myself well, I know that I tend to be a bit more optimistic, maybe a bit more compassionate. I generally tend to function as the best version of myself when I'm really looking after my needs and taking care of myself. So that's kind of just a little mindset tweak that I've found has been really helpful. If I'm feeling guilty about taking the time to look after myself, I think, you know, it's good for me, but it's also really good for everyone that's around me and who gets to experience this more rested, more calmer, more optimistic version of myself. So that's kind of just how I go about that.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Suzanne, did you want to unmute yourself to ask your question about meditation in the workplace?
Yes, I just had a question, Rachel. When I was back in the workplace, I found it difficult when I might be, because it was a space where it was hard to take a break if you were particularly on the phones and there might have been a challenging call, and trying to take a moment of mindfulness in a busy situation where there's a lot of noise around and there's no spaces around to, you know, take a quiet break without maybe seeing someone and they ask you and you just don't want to talk to anyone. That's one thing I found challenging. I know that might be different going back to the workplace with not so many people around, but still, just that's one thing that I found difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And that's totally understandable. I think one of the really great things about mindfulness is that we can practice it and no one has to know. So even if you are in that really busy environment and you feel like I just need a moment to breathe, or maybe even if it's quite a loud environment and you're finding it difficult to focus on your breath or your internal experiences, use those external experiences to your advantage. So tune into your sense of sound. Maybe spending 1 or 2 minutes just asking, what can I hear right now? And tuning into those sounds in that non-judgmental way can be a very simple way to practice mindfulness, but it might just give you that little bit of a break. And also, if you can implement a mindful breathing technique, that could be an ideal situation. So I used to do these quite a lot when I was at work in my old job. So I was in an office and I worked with about 15 different project managers, and I was like their admin person. So I had a lot of people coming to me with different things. I was organizing travel and finances and things like that. So sometimes everything kind of happened all at once. And it was quite difficult and quite busy. So mindful breathing was kind of my best friend. I would just either, if I was in like a quiet space, I could place my hand on my chest and just feel that. But there's other breathing techniques that you can do that no one will see. So the Point of Stillness is another really lovely one to do, where you just take your breaths as normal, but you pay attention to that really short pause at the end of the exhale. So as you breathe in and then out, you'll notice that just for a little moment, your body can become very still. And that little point of stillness can be a really lovely thing to tune into if you can.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great question.
Miana, you had another question as well.
Oh, yes. I started meditating a while back, and I was using sort of guided meditation to help me get through the meditation. And I've recently started listening just to music and letting my mind wander a little bit more. Do you recommend one over the other? Like, is there a preferred way of meditating, I guess?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And it's great to hear that you've been experimenting with different meditation practices. Really, what I recommend is just to have fun and to experiment and to be curious about what experiences you can have. I think that the more that you experiment with different things, the more you will find what resonates with you, and also the more you'll find which meditation practices can suit different situations better. So, for example, I use both guided meditations and meditation music. Today, before I did this session, I listened to a 20-minute meditation music just to let my thoughts kind of do what they wanted with no pressure, just because that was what I felt like I needed. But sometimes at the start of the day, particularly, I don't know why, but for me, I really resonate with the guided meditations. And also if I'm trying to fall asleep at night, I think more because I'm trying to focus my thoughts on the present moment and I don't want them wandering so much. That's kind of what I found has worked for me, but on different days it's different too. Sometimes I'll start a guided meditation and just be like, no, you know what, I think I just want to do a self-guided meditation or just listen to meditation music. So I really think that the awesome thing about what you've said is that you're experimenting with different things and finding what resonates with you. I think the more techniques that we can learn and be able to implement, the better. So just keep that up. I think that's great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We've had some great questions tonight, so thank you to everyone who's been involved and asked those questions. We have come to the end. Hang on, nope. Oh no, another comment. But lots of really great comments coming through the chat, people talking about what works for them, and I think that was really great. Everybody's going to have something different that works for them, so it's lots of suggestions coming up, so people can go out and try them all and find out what one resonates with them, as you said. I got an interesting one about masks at the moment, and how that's making things difficult for breathing. So Rini, is it? Did you want to come on, unmute yourself and ask that one?
Yes, thanks, Melissa. Hi, Rachel. I just found that when outside and having put a mask on, I find it a bit difficult to do mindful breathing. Is there the technique or tips that you can recommend while I'm outside and able to do some meditation?
Yeah, definitely. So if a particular technique isn't feeling quite right, the awesome thing about mindfulness is that there's so many different ones that you can use. So perhaps if you're going out and feeling like it's a bit too intense trying to do mindful breathing with a mask on, maybe something like tuning into the sensation of the solid ground underneath your feet can again be quite a nice grounding practice to use. Or noticing your senses. I think tuning into sense of sight can be a really great one because it is very immersive. So that practice I mentioned earlier about looking at objects and actually labeling them. So green plant, grey floor, white wall, yellow sun, red fence, actually labeling things like that can be a wonderful practice. I used to use that all the time when I was on the train going to my job in the morning. And I used to get quite stressed on my commute, so I started implementing these little practices to see what worked, and that was one of my favorites in the morning, especially just because it does get you focused on the environment. And you might even, there was other little spin on that technique that I used to use, which was noticing anything that I hadn't seen before. So really going into that practice with the intention of, I wonder if there's anything new that I haven't seen before. And then you're kind of looking for it. And that can be a really nice little trick that you can try out. I think that, it's nice to be able to adapt to different situations, and not every mindfulness practice will suit every single situation either. So it's nice to build up a bit of a repertoire of different techniques and kind of be able to apply them and see what works for you in that moment. Thank you. Another great question. These are all amazing questions. Thanks, everyone.
Sue, you had your hand up. Did you have a question you'd like to come on and ask? Is Sue there at all? No, we might have lost Sue. Lots of great, lots of thank yous coming through the chat, Rachel, for your information that you've provided us tonight.
Thank you.
Sue, I can see you've still got your hand up. Is there something you'd like to ask? We might head over to Erica and we'll give Sue another try in a moment. Erica, you got your hand up there.
Hello, Rachael.
Hi, Erica.
Thank you so much for today. I have a question. I just want to know how we can accept the anxiety emotions when, like, mindfully, when you have rejected during a lot of years. Like how you can accept them really mindfully.
Yeah, so quite vulnerable and challenging emotions, how to accept those mindfully. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I might kind of share a little experience with you. So in early 2019, my book got released. And over that week, I had a number of live events. I was traveling quite a lot. And in that same period, my granddad passed away. So about halfway through the first week of the big launch, he became ill very, very quickly and passed away just before we were able to get back here and see him, which was very difficult. We were really close growing up. He lived next door, so we spent a lot of time together. And it was such an overwhelming week because there was this roller coaster of so exciting. My book's come out. I'm doing all these wonderful events and people are coming and I'm doing interviews and it's amazing. And then this very intense low where there was a lot of grief and a lot of processing that emotion. And then having to kind of pick myself back up so I could get to the next event and, and smile and be there for the people that had come to see me. And to process the grief in that time, it was very overwhelming, but there was one afternoon where it was particularly intense, and I literally just went into my bedroom, tucked up myself under the doona and just cried and just said, you know, I'm really feeling so sad. I'm really feeling the grief. It's all through my body. It's like I'm crying. I can't even control it. I'm just sobbing. Emotions can be quite intense sometimes, but sometimes as well, when we give ourselves the space to feel them, that's when we can start to heal. So that's the mindset that I try to tap into. Anytime that I notice a very intense emotion is coming up for me, I remind myself that if I take the time to feel this emotion and to try and process this emotion, and then to look after my needs as well. So once I've kind of processed the emotion, asking, is there anything I can do to look after myself? That's kind of the way that I go about that. Hopefully that's given some insight into how you can go about it. I think it's very different for everybody. We all experience emotions in different ways and to different intensities. But with practice and trying to have that non-judgmental attitude, just saying, you know, it's okay that I'm feeling this way. It's normal that I'm feeling this way. I'm allowed to feel this way, and giving ourselves that permission can be a great way to navigate through intense or raw or vulnerable emotions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
I think that was potentially a beautiful way to maybe end tonight's event. Thank you for sharing something that's obviously so close to you, and I hope that that's helped some other people who might be going through knowing how to struggle with those really strong emotions. So you know, it's really lovely that you could share something so personal in that moment. Lots of thanks coming through the chat, lots of thank yous in there. Rachel, you've been like absolutely amazing tonight, so thank you for your time, for your insight. Just before we finish up, I just want to let some people know about some upcoming events in the EnviroCentre. All of these are on our website, so you can jump onto our website and have a look. So a couple of events coming up next week. On Thursday, the 1st of October, we have DIY natural beauty products. So Lily from Mademoiselle Organic is going to be coming in, and the ingredients are on our website, so bring them along and we're going to make them all together. So that's coming up next Thursday the 1st. And then on Wednesday the 7th of October, author Tyson Yunkaporta is going to be here talking about his book Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. So get into that one. That's going to be a really great conversation there as well. And then Wednesday the 14th of October, we have Modern Mending with Erin Louise Fitzgerald talking about how we can minimise our waste by making sure we don't throw things out just because they've got a hole or a rip or a button's fallen off. So all these really easy, simple things that we can do to keep our clothes running, lasting a lot longer. They're just the next three. We've got events booked in up until December, so jump on our website and have a look. But thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you, Rachel, for your time. Really appreciate everything tonight. And we'll see you next week here at the EnviroCentre, and stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Going to stop recording.